You're up one moment, you're down the next.
David, did you do your patriotic duty this week?
As in get vaccinated?
I think I recall that you had jury duty this week, no?
Oh, shit.
You're going to jail.
I'm not going to jail.
You're going to jail.
Number one, they can't prove whether or not you got it in the mail. Number two, come get me.
They are.
Come get me now.
If they listen to this episode, they're going to be able to quote unquote prove it.
I'll tell them that I was saving a woman from a burning building and they'll have to comply. Or I was driving my geriatric client to a Winn-Dixie, Walgreens,
none of those
CVS,
but for real,
to get her
like
vaccinated.
you seriously didn't go?
No, I did my civic duty. I called in, and I was gonna be like, I think I've got the black lung pop. I don't know if I should come in tomorrow, but I had my excuses all built in. But then the pre-recording, because they can't even be bothered to answer the phone, you know, they're gonna take your day away from
Hashtag government.
Hashtag bureaucracy. That's a fun one to say. So there's a pre-recorded thing that just said, hey, pay close attention. I was like, oh, crap, here it comes. And then they're like, all the people that are supposed to have jury duty on 8/5/21 have been excused and will not be summoned for at least 1 year. How about that? I was like, what, bitch? So I went out and I was like, I'm going to drink. But then I just took a nap.
So you got the day off work anticipating to go, and then
and then I did the old person thing by going to bed early.
Nice. Do you have your glass of warm milk and a belly rub?
Snuggled in my Afghan, watching Netflix, Buy or Sell or House Hunters or whatever the hell it was.
All right, so you're not a complete piece of trash that, and no offense to any listeners, I'm speaking purely to the co-host here. But a complete piece of trash that, you know, got out of jury duty when people like you are exactly who needs to be on juries to, you know, nullify stuff if it's a stupid, charge like, you know, simple possession or something like that.
Yeah, I smoke crack. Why would I ever
put somebody else in a cage for it? Right?
I mean, geez whiz.
Well, I guess, you know, Hunter Biden.
Well, hold on. It's illegal to suck a dick for money? Wait. I mean, I do that on the regs.
I hear it from time to time.
It's my own, but I pay myself. But
all right, so I was really, when I asked you that question, I was anticipating some awesome story, and it was just simply that's life in 2021. That's when you're like, hey, we're gonna make it through 2020. It's like, show me the contract that said 2021 is going to be so much better than 2020. We're going to get to the other side of this, and it's going to be the roaring 20s again, baby.
And everyone's just going to be banging in the streets, just all these fluids going everywhere and breathing on people and, you know, hugging and kissing and doing stuff. You know, like that one, like when they came home from the war and that guy, like, grabbed that woman, did the dip, and, like, kissed her. And that old timey, but just different. Like, have you seen what the kids are doing at raves nowadays? They've got nipple tape on, for God's sake, and fishnets. It's like, we have to up the ante. It's not going to be that old classic kiss on the lips. It's going to be down and dirty, but it'll be like it.
All right. So with that imagery in mind,
celebration,
are you ready to jump in?
Yeah.
Not into that.
Oh,
into the episode.
Well. Dual meaning, yeah.
Okay.
Accidental double entendres.
All right, here we go. Welcome to Weapons of Meme Destruction Podcast, episode 55, which can be found at wmdpodcast.com/55. You'll also be able to catch it on YouTube. And then you can link up with us non-podcast related on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Just search Weapons of Meme Destruction wherever you do your searching.
But not Facebook yet because we don't like Zuckerberg.
Yes. We don't. We pre-zuck the zuck before the zuck could zuck us.
You mean
I can't believe I said all
those
of that without
zucks,
slipping up.
all those zucks and not one fuck. I
Yep.
can't believe.
I'm a professional. Half of this podcast is professional. The
No
other
one
half
would argue with that. The other half would agree with you. The other half also likes to have fun and get down and dirty in the streets with the naughty girls.
Fair enough. So, on today's episode, and when we started referring to episodes in the past of like on this week's episode of the last season of the United States, it was partially serious but partially joking, but this is starting to hit pretty close to home. The crazier things get, it really does seem like, we're basically just living through the collapse of the Roman Empire, except we have Wi-Fi.
It's not funny anymore, dude.
It's not.
I was trying to laugh, but it's not funny anymore.
And another thing we've been saying for the past couple episodes is we are just as tired of talking about COVID, but
can we promise like next week we'll do our best not to even mention the 19.
Have something funny to say next week, and then we can do.
Maybe I'll get assaulted by another biker. Maybe something terrible will happen to me.
That was episode 5. If you're a new listener and you haven't listened to episode 5 and you want to laugh to just escape the COVID hysteria, go back and listen to episode 5.
We haven't done a break episode in a while either.
I know. Shame on us.
I thought we had a shot at it this week because nothing really happened. But
anyway, you probably gathered from, as David would say, the heaping bowl of foreshadowing we just gave you that yes, this episode is more collapse of the empire themed as well as COVID themed, because damn it, these branch covidians just won't let up.
These Westboro 19ists.
So on today's episode, we're discussing the fascistic tones. I mean, the whole thing has been from day one, if you ask us. But,
excuse me, hold on. This fascistic facade.
Yeah. I mean,
that's how you market
it also
bitch.
Goes to the core too. But, facade core. Potato.
Well, it rings better. Alliterations always sound better.
If you ask us, it's been along those lines from day one. But you remember a couple weeks ago, or actually maybe a couple months ago, and we did an episode on this, about the pearl clutching that went on with the Libertarian Party of Kentucky Twitter account that, basically compared the concept of a COVID passport, show me your papers mentality, with the Star of David. And everybody was losing their minds. Like, that was just a ridiculous comparison to make, and you're probably anti-Semitic or whatever, anything to avoid actually having the conversation. Well, fast forward to today, and I mean, gloves are off from the COVID cult. Like, they just don't even care anymore. They're like, oh, those are the comparisons you're going to make? Well, we're going to go full bore, baby.
I mean, it's interesting because there's no self-reflection. Like you said, they're just going full steam ahead. And there's no like, hey, maybe we've gotten things wrong in the past. Maybe we need to pump the brakes. Maybe we need to not be so aggressive because we've been aggressive. Let's be honest. We've been aggressive this entire time. And it only seems to push people away or make people more, standoffish. Maybe we should be a little more accepting, admit some of our own faults and admit some of the facts that we've been wrong.
You're saying the cult members.
Correct.
Yeah.
If they would have some introspection and be like, okay, we haven't gotten everything right.
Do a little bit of mirror gazing.
Right. Maybe instead of just keeping the finger firmly planted in the other person's face, maybe turn it around and say, what have I done wrong? And let's come to remember, when Biden got elected, this was supposed to be the time to come together. This was supposed to be the time to like reach out to the Republican side and like hold the lion will lay down with the lamb and so on and so forth. That was to be the coming together. And since Biden's been elected, the fears only ramped up. And instead of having Donald Trump ranting about putting lights in your veins, now we have Captain Whispers saying, pay him more money. I signed that bill. It goes to the economy. Bring in the next 10-year-old girl for me to smell.
So if you have been spending any time in the popular discourse, Twitter or whatever, you have probably come away with the feeling, whether you have strong feelings one way or another, that the term fascism is a bit like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Everybody, like you have some people who just like everybody who disagrees with me is a fascist.
Or you Democrats might choose the phrase trying to indict Trump. It's harder than,
Yeah, like it's kind of this
slipperiest of slipperies.
This catch-all term to basically mean like people who I just find undesirable for any number of reasons.
Or that just generally disagree with me.
We think that's relatively destructive to discourse, not just because, if you start calling people the worst thing you can think of, they're probably not going to engage with you in an honest back and forth. But we think that getting what fascism actually is right will add some clarity to what we're seeing in the world today, because, we've been alluding to the covidiots, getting more fascist, and we're going to give you examples. But first, as all good lawyers are supposed to do, you define your terms first. So that's where we're going to start. And I'm going to give you a few quotes. The first one is rather lengthy, but the other three are pretty short. I'm going to give you 4 quotes in total. 3 from a man named Giovanni Gentili, and I'll tell you who he is here in a second, and 1 from
Giovanni
Mussolini.
Gentili.
Yeah, you have to do
you can't see us, but we're definitely doing the Italian.
You have to do the chef's
kiss.
kiss. Yeah, with your fingers when you say it.
You respect him. You come to him with this thing. Manicari is Struzzi.
So we have 3 quotes from Gentili and 1 from Mussolini. And for all intents and purposes, you could say, along with some other characters, that these are the founding fathers of fascism. So what they have to say about what fascism is rather important, not some, blue-haired offended person on Twitter. So, from a book written by Gentili called The Origins and Doctrine of Fascism, if you want to look this up, the first quote from Gentili, like I said, is a little long, but it goes a little something like this. Quote, "The great social and constitutional reform that fascism is accomplishing, instituting the corporative syndicalist regime as a substitute for the old-fashioned capitalist liberal state, arose out of the very character of the fascist state. Fascism accepted from syndicalism the idea of the educative and moral function of the syndicate. But since the intention was to overcome the antithesis between the state and the syndicate, the effort was made to enter the system of syndicates harmoniously into corporations, subject to discipline by the state, and to thereby give expression to the organic character of the state." So just remember that last part about merging the state and corporations into one system subject to discipline by the state. That's kind of the core tenet of fascism. Now, quote 2 from Gentili, quote, "Every citizen shares a relationship with the state that is so intimate that the state exists only insofar as it is made to exist by the citizen. Thus, its formation is a product of the consciousness of each individual and thus of the masses, in which the power of the state consists." So clearly drawing a connection there between the people or the state or the people. More from Mussolini on that later. And the last quote by Gentili, and this one is rather applicable to the whole New York COVID passport to get into a restaurant thing. Gentili says, quote, "Liberty is found only in the state, and the state is authority." And then the last quote, this one from Mussolini, and it's the only Mussolini quote I'll give you on this topic, then we'll get back into it, is, quote, "The people is the body of the state, and the state is the spirit of the people. In the fascist concept, the people is the state, and the state is the people. The tools with which the idealita is achieved in the state are the party and the corporation."
Hey, Dane, as we clatter our way through this episode, this sounds like a good time for a advertisement break.
If we had one?
Maybe if we did.
Well, you're in luck, because we do.
Oh, I was going out on a limb there.
The Solutionary Summit 2021 will be held in our backyard, Miami, Florida, September 3rd through the 5th. What is the Solutionary Summit, you ask? It's a 3-day event that will present a host of independent thinkers from all backgrounds. They will have panels on economics, cultural discussions, and political strategy from a powerful lineup of speakers. The panels will also include Q&A sessions discussing freedom, attacks on liberty, race relations, effective community outreach, and other current topics.
Dane, this sounds like a momentous occasion. How would I acquire tickets to it?
Oh, it is very momentous, but you better act fast because there's only 250 seats available and they will sell out quickly. So reach out to us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere you find weapons of meme destruction. Drop us a DM, drop us a comment, ask how to get tickets to the Solutionary Summit 2021, and we will hook you up. Because at the end of the day, if you want to see the world, and in particular your community, freer in your lifetime, then the Solutionary Summit 2021 in Miami, Florida, September 3rd through 5th, is the place to be. You'll get to meet your gracious co-hosts here, as well as the panel of speakers.
How could you refuse?
So, according to Gentili and Mussolini, this idea where the state gives direction to the corporation to achieve, according to Mussolini, the idealita, which is to be achieved via the state, is to give direction to the corporation and have the corporation basically carry out state functions. That is fascism fundamentally at its core. And when you think about Gentili's quotes about the state as the people and the people are state, and Mussolini says a little bit of that too, think about what they're saying there. They're saying that fascism is the epitome, the highest achievement of quote unquote democracy. Because if the people are the state and the state tells the corporations what to do in order to achieve the state's goals, then the state is accomplishing what the people want it to accomplish. That's what every person who touts democracy as this sacred institution, that's what they're saying. We are the state. The state does what we want it to do. And that's exactly what the fascists are saying here. So keep those definitions and those quotes in mind when you think about what's going on with COVID and why it is completely accurate to say that this is full-blown fascism.
Well, it's a good thing to know that we're definitely not doing any of that here. It's good to know that, I mean, we haven't strayed so far as to say that we are fascists, even though we call each other fascists all the time. I guess the main problem I have with that is the identity that the state is the people and the people are the state. Technically, that's what's supposed to happen here, right?
Yeah, I mean, you ask any hardcore, go democracy. Democracy is the best political arrangement we could come up with. That's exactly what they say, right? They say you are the government, and if the government's not doing what you like, you need to. Or my other favorite one is, if you didn't vote, you don't get to complain, right? That is still fundamentally premised on the idea that you are part of this apparatus that is doing whatever it's doing to you. And if you don't participate in its popularity contest...
Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself.
Exactly.
Stop hitting yourself.
While it's grabbing your hand and hitting you.
Exactly. He's the big brother. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. No, that's great. That's wonderful. And again, like that perfect analogy, it's not like they're doing that to us. It's not like they're turning, your brother against your brother because one sees a vaccine and one sees an experiment. That being said, at least we have an understanding between each other that, like, you're an American, I respect what you want to do with your body, and I will not force upon you anything that I would not want forced upon me, and I will not infringe upon your rights. That's what's happening, right, Dane?
Well, I think what you're describing there, and to that first part of Gentili's quote about the fascist substitute, what it's trying to replace is the old-fashioned capitalist liberal state. And liberal in this context, this is classical liberalism. This is the idea that rights come from God, not from government. This kind of natural law sort of thing. This premise that America was founded on, right? And what you just described of, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, you're going to do what you're going to do, and if we disagree, we're just going to agree to disagree and try to live peacefully with each other. That is kind of the old liberal version of the state in the classical liberal sense, but the fascist fundamentally says we want to replace that. And we want to replace that with this idea that the people in the state are one and the same. So therefore, when the state basically commandeers corporations for state functions, it's giving the people what the people want.
Well, what I was saying was I was trying to softball this one in for you, but we'll take it.
Swung and a miss.
We'll take it back. We'll take it back, and we'll say like, yes, what I just described was classic liberalism, like which is what our democracy is supposed to be. I won't mess with you, just don't mess with me. That's very libertarian. What's happening right now is that things are going awry, so to speak, and we are. Instead of blaming the powers that be or being at least, critical of the powers that be, that maybe they haven't led us in the most proper way, we are taking this thing, listening to the powers that be, i.e. the cathedral that we've referred to multiple times on this podcast and so on and so forth. They keep listening to the cathedral and then blaming their fellow man for the spread of this virus. And now they're turning back to the state to start mandating people to do things that they don't want to do, right? Which is quintessentially what we call fascism now. Yeah. Right? Okay.
And I mean, and also think about the terms that, and again, we're going to fast forward to today. Think about the terms that, the Biden administration and Fauci and all, like these terms of the reason why a mandate is acceptable or the reason why government needs to do this, apply this pressure or that pressure or, get corporation X, Y, or Z to do it. It's always couched in the terms of this is what's in the general welfare, right? Is that government power is at its strongest when it's acting in defense of the general welfare. So they'll say, these unvaccinated people or whatever, the people that just don't want to get the COVID vaccine for whatever reason, right? They are menaces to society. They're, dangerous people who are putting everybody else at risk.
Now they're becoming the heel to everything. Now they're becoming, and again, not to go Manichaeanism on this one, but now they're starting to turn into that, like, we need to blame somebody for what's going wrong here. So we better blame these other people that aren't us, that never really were us.
Mm-hmm.
So all I was going to add on to that was that I forgot what I was going to add on. Please,
I'm sure you'll think of it, but
it'll come back.
To that point, if you haven't listened to episode 54, last week's episode, that is, important for this point we're trying to make is for them to couch their entire narrative of it's exclusively the unvaccinated's fault for continuing spread and stuff like that. Is first of all, they're not even testing for it. The CDC has said that they don't have the resources to test for breakthrough cases in the vaccinated. So if you can't even give us numbers to tell us how many vaccinated people are getting it, again, even if it's mild, their symptoms aren't as bad, the vaccine's doing what it was supposed to do, it's supposed to, make it more manageable. That still isn't saying that they're not getting it and then therefore spreading it. So when their whole narrative is around, well, it's only the unvaccinated that are putting everybody else at risk, they can't make that claim on their own terms. They don't have the data for it.
And if we were a goddamn island, that would make sense. If we were an island that nobody knew anything about, that would make sense too. But to say that, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard this within the past 2 weeks, is that the Republicans are the reason that this thing is spreading because they won't get the jab. Therefore, they're allowing this thing to mutate within inside them and create the Delta variant. And now it's even more dangerous. And now this thing isn't contained. And now the only reason that the vaccines aren't working is because there's a Delta variant. Well, here's a problem that I have with that. Is that the world, and I know this might shock people, the world is bigger than the United States. I know it's crazy. I know it's crazy to hear. There's like a lot of other countries. There's like at least 100 other countries. I know that's crazy. And of those at least 100 plus countries, most of them don't have vaccines readily available to their population. So before we start looking at the, what would you say? What are we, 80%? Not even 80% vaccinated. It doesn't matter. Like there's let's call it 400 million people in this country, just for easy math's sake. So instead of blaming, let's call it 300 million people for not getting the jab, let's go ahead and look at the 5 billion that can't get the jab, that don't have the jab readily available to them. Therefore, they can't help but catch this thing and mutate it further. Let's look at logic and reason before we look at emotional response. That's all I'm saying.
Right. And that's the other, you brought up another point that I want to hit on here, which kind of now, again, we've laid out the definition for what fascism is. And if anybody tries to tell you, dear listener, that what the government is doing by working hand in glove with corporations to further government objectives, and government objectives being to get more people vaccinated, to, push the vaccine on the vaccine hesitant, or whatever the case may be, that is textbook quintessential fascism. If you ask the founding fathers of fascism, they would absolutely look at what is going on between corporations and the US government today and be like, yep, that's exactly what we were hoping for. But you brought up a good point in your last statement about, kind of the narrative out there is like, oh, it's, again, the virus should not have been politicized, but here we are 18 months later and it is, and we're playing the ball as it lies. Saying, well, it's the Republicans that are doing it. Well, interesting that this past week, the CDC reported that only 28.4% of the Black community has received the COVID vaccine. Now, we've explained on past episodes why the hesitancy within that community in particular might be pretty well justified. They have been abused by the government, either forcing things on them or withholding treatments from them, like the Tuskegee experiments, for a long period of time. So why shouldn't they be skeptical? Why shouldn't they be suspect? But it's funny because, every 4 years rolls around,
they're supposed to be Democrat too, right?
It's not that, the Black community is coming out in droves for Republicans.
I mean,
so to kind of paint this picture that it's only COVID, or it's only Republicans, or it's only pro-Trumpers that are not getting the vaccine, that's just absurd.
To quote Joe Biden, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black.
You ain't black, right? Well, I guess when you put it that way, Grandpa Joe, I guess they're not. I guess they might be Republicans.
Jesus. So okay. Well, then I guess he lost 72% of his vote. I don't know, man.
That's good, quick maths.
Thanks, bud. It's a good thing I'm a lawyer.
So that's a rather, and again, so what that means is when states like California, or with New York's recent ban on using restaurants and other indoor businesses unless you show proof of your vaccination. I mean, if we're just going by the numbers,
let's just go by the numbers.
If voting ID is a return to Jim Crow and racism because it disproportionately affects people of color, well, these policies, which by the numbers would disproportionately affect peoples of color, this is a return to Jim Crow segregation. You're saying, hey, Black people, you're not allowed to go in these businesses because you haven't shown the right papers. You can call it whatever you want. You can say that that's public health, that's general welfare. You can justify it whatever you want, but you are disproportionately harming the Black community because they, in large majority, have suspicions about getting this vaccine in particular. So I looked at that and I said, it's just the Democrats returning to their Jim Crow roots.
Not a year ago. Where you guys, Black Lives Matter, and so on and so forth. You're supporting the cause, ending racism, yada, yada, yada. And not a year removed, you're on the wrong side of the statistics of a racist, fascist view.
Yeah. So
by all means, it might have happened to you by accident, but now that you know about it, you better make actions to fix it, because God knows that if you don't, you could be racist.
And, and so now that we have kind of laid out the definition and basically where we stand on the whole fascism concept, which we are on extremely solid grounds on that point, just a couple of those points. We just alluded to it in the last one. The New York COVID, passport, which I think goes into effect early September, could be sooner, about not letting people indoor, restaurants, things
You know what's
like
a great
that, unless
idea
they show
though?
their
By the way,
papers.
just to segue, just to like caveat this one, and then we'll plug right back into it. We should definitely follow one of the leading states that led the way and led the charge during COVID, that had the best numbers during all this, and definitely didn't have a failed state, and definitely didn't have the largest numbers, and definitely didn't start this thing out with a goddamn murdering 16,000 people by the governor's ordinance, and because they've
Wait a minute,
nailed this.
You're referring to the guy who won an Emmy for how well he handled
And is
COVID
now-
because he wrote a book,
and
right?
is now under indictment for sexual abuse, which I don't know is hashtag Me Too.
That's
Was
not a
2
thing
years
anymore.
ago. It's gone. It's gone. You guys.
That doesn't count.
We got them all. We got them all. There's no more rapists out there ever. They're certainly not democratic if they are.
So when Bill de Blasio in particular in New York City, now we were referring, if you've been living under a rock, we were referring to the governor of New York, which is Andrew Cuomo, but
They're gonna call him a Republican now.
probably he's
That damn Republican.
he's Republican
Cuomo.
light or something like that. But this policy in particular is within the city itself, and that is led by Mayor de Blasio. Now, so here's the thing. Think about those quotes that we gave you from the founding fathers of fascism, and is that not exactly what's going on? The government is telling private businesses, you must refuse service to these individuals if they don't have the correct paperwork. If that isn't state using private business to further state objectives, which is to increase vaccination, then again, if that's not fascism to you, you're not entitled to the rest of the discussion because you're being disingenuous.
You ain't black. But if I may, if I could use a coin a term or a phrase, is show us your papers. Does that not sound? Show us your vaccine, yeah. Have you got the good little boy shot in your arm? Can you come out and play with the others? Oh no, sorry, persons that is not as good as us. You have to go back home and you can't have your freedoms.
Which, by the way, weren't we called conspiracy theorists in March, April, May of 2020 for suggesting that mandatory vaccines and vaccine passports were going to come?
Dane.
I mean, I'm sure we were called that, but as I saw somebody on the Twitters or the Instagrams or somewhere on the internet said, typically, quote unquote, conspiracy theorists just turn out to be ahead of the curve.
Well, it's just crazy. Like, if nothing had ever gone wrong ever, then yeah, we'd be nuts. We'd be crazed lunatics. Like, if the sun was always shining and the birds were always chirping, then yes. We were saying, one of these days there's going to be a storm cloud. Like, yeah, we'd look crazy. But when it storms every day, and just because you haven't been affected by it directly yet, that you know of, we're the crazy ones. Because things that worked out in your favor were because of your hard work. There was never any bad luck in this world ever. Go ahead, Dan.
Now, in addition to the New York COVID passport being a clear example of fascism, we've seen some articles also come out this week. And again, they're opinion pieces at this point, and they're getting quote unquote doctors to write these opinion pieces because apparently that gives it more validity. But they're arguing that healthcare professionals should be required to get vaccinated or, they need to be fired. Now, the ostensible purpose or the rationale for this opinion is that, well, they're caring for at-risk individuals. So maybe people that have 47 comorbidities. And because of that, that's why they need to be vaccinated. Now, what you won't find is any nuance in these opinion pieces that show, well, should we make a distinction between people that have had COVID and not vaccinated, so maybe they have some natural immunity or not? Now, they'll just swipe that away, dismiss that out of hand, like that doesn't count. And we're going to link to these on the show notes page so you can read them for yourself. These are studies published at meddoctorxiv.com, and here's one conclusion from a Cleveland study. So there's a Cleveland study and there's an Israeli study. And the conclusion from the Cleveland study says this, and I'm reading verbatim, quote, individuals who have had SARS-CoV-2 infection are unlikely to benefit from COVID-19 vaccination. and vaccines can be safely prioritized to those who have not been infected. And the study was a cumulative incidence of COVID-19 was examined among 52,238 employees in an American healthcare system. So this study looked at 52,000 employees and came away with the conclusion that the COVID vaccine is probably not that beneficial for somebody who has natural immunity from getting COVID, and that the vaccines are probably better used on people who haven't. Now, that's not a panacea. That's not saying that nobody in the healthcare system, but that is saying that a medical professional who has COVID at some point in time is in a different class. There's no proof that they have to have the COVID vaccine in order to stop passing it to quote unquote at-risk patients. Again, because of what we said last week, is that there's no proof that the vaccinated aren't also putting those same patients at risk. That's number one. And number two is, according to this study, and again, an Israeli study, we'll link both at wmdpodcast.com/55, both studies say there's probably no extra benefit to immunity status from the vaccine versus natural immunity. Now, in light of that, if you are arguing for the state to impose mandates, because again, not all of these healthcare, sectors are privately run. Some are, but some aren't. Some are state run. But in either case, if you're going to mandate across the board that healthcare professionals need to get vaccinated, again, that is textbook fascism. And it's not based on quote unquote the science. I just read you a conclusion from a scientific paper that found otherwise. So, as one person put on the internet, which we couldn't agree with more, is last year's heroes are this year's unemployed. You are useless to the state, much like the fascists of old. Once you've served your purpose, once we've pranced you around like the dancing bear and like, hey, hooray for our heroes or whatever. So if you don't fall in line after that fact,
but they've never
you're
done
no
that
longer
before.
useful and we'll do away with you.
They've never done that before. It's not like they do that to our war veterans all the time.
Yep.
So it's a good thing that we take care of all the people in this capitalistic society. Anyway, all I'll say to that point is, from the people that follow the science, what science always does is it goes back and coexes all the things. So it goes back and it looks at how it did. It runs the numbers and it sees how effective it was. How many times have the scientists, i.e. the Democratic Party, gone back and checked their numbers? How many times has Pfizer checked their numbers and efficacy in their jab? How many times has Moderna checked their efficacy in their jab? If I remember correctly, Pfizer was 90%. You're not going to catch this thing. And then Moderna was 95%. You're not going to catch this thing. And now that 90 and 95% has gone away. You don't even hear it anymore. But what you will hear,
it's memory hold. Yeah.
what you will hear,
Any part of the narrative
is
falls
that,
apart.
well, it might not be the 90%, but you're not going to get that sick. All the people that are in the ICU right now don't have the jab.
Yeah.
How the fuck do you know that? Are you going in there and interviewing every single one in the ICU?
Well,
Really?
like they've said, like we said last week, the CDC isn't even really testing for breakthrough cases anymore because they don't have the quote unquote resources to do it. So again, if you don't have the data, how are you making claims by saying that this isn't happening amongst vaccinated individuals? But even setting all of that aside, to your point about, okay, if you get the vaccine, your symptoms are going to be less, it's going to be more manageable if you get it, all that kind of stuff. We've never argued that. We've never said that that's not true. In that sense, COVID is very much like the flu in the sense that there is no cure to the flu. You don't eradicate the flu. If you want the vaccine, you get the vaccine under the purposes of, if you do wind up getting the flu, your symptoms are more manageable. We get that. Flu's been around for a long time. COVID is not going away. We're going to have to learn to live with it. And maybe getting the vaccine is one way to do it. If you're an at-risk population, you get the vaccine, you have less symptoms, you have a better chance of survival. Never disagreed with that. Go for it if that's what your goal is. But all of this extra stuff of it's only the unvaccinated that are sprayed in it, or you won't get it if you get the vaccine, and all of that kind of stuff, that's the stuff, the scare tactics, the fear mongering that we're upset.
And we hear you. We hear you, Dane, David, come on. That's just, how could they have known? They were predicting it. So how could they have known? Sure, fine. That's fine. We won't hold your feet completely to the fire on the vaccine. But we will hold your feet to the fire on rhetoric and the difference between rhetoric and fact. How do you tell the difference between rhetoric and fact, David? Let me help you. Facts don't change until they're disproven. And then guess what? They're no longer called facts anymore. Rhetoric moves. Rhetoric is fluid. And David, I'm having a hard time understanding this. Can you give me an example within this scientific-based democracy that we are in? Absolutely. Masks. First off, they said they don't work. And by they, I mean Fauci. And we can get into Fauci as much as we want.
It was a noble lie, though.
It was a noble lie. It was to save all those important people that are now
we're not going to fire.
That they're going to fire because they didn't get the vaccine. Then he said that masks do work. And then once the vaccine came out, hold on. And then he said, well, the only reason he said masks don't work is because I was trying to save the important people.
They work so well that at one point, the CDC director, Redfield, said that the mask is better than the vaccine. Better. At preventing you from getting COVID. Said that in front of Congress.
Yeah. And then, once the vaccine rolls out, then all of a sudden, everybody says, yeah, well, masks don't really work. Fauci said that. Then he retracted it. Then the CDC came out and said, well, masks may or may not have worked. We don't know.
But if you get the vaccine, you can take your mask off.
Yeah, take it off. And then it came like masks off. Okay, we don't need them anymore. And now that we have a Delta variant.
Well, by the way, because I knew you were going to get to Delta. When they said, what was it, late May, that you could take the mask off if you were vaccinated, the Delta variant was already here.
Right.
We knew it existed.
Right.
So they can't say that, oh, well, we said that in a different world and now the Delta variant's changed anything. That's bullshit. Because it was here when they said that.
Okay. And now we're going back to mandating masks and mandating social distancing. I'm sorry. We're going to go back to the same thing that you yourself had said that may or may not be efficient. Multiple times, you flip-flopped on that quote-unquote fact multiple times. And if it doesn't work, and clearly didn't really prevent any of the spread, you could say it did, you could say it didn't, maybe it'd been worse, maybe it'd been better, that's all conjecture. Why are we going to do the same things that we did that didn't help stop the spread before? Why are we going to keep doing, you know what the definition of insanity is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. We're fucking insane. That's the difference between
our
fact
leaders are.
And rhetoric. Well, our leaders that then disseminate this quote-unquote fact down to their people and they follow it, even though it turns out to be a lie, and they say, well, we were just doing our best. Well, then you weren't doing science then. So stop claiming science. Stop claiming fact. It's rhetoric, and you want us to adhere to it, period.
Yeah, and that's the thing about, rhetoric is it's infinitely adjustable, which I think David was already making that point anyway, and to basically draw a connection, a one-to-one relationship between quote unquote the science and the rhetoric around the science. That's cult-like behavior. When you start saying that somebody like Fauci is so infallible that you can't criticize him, and in his own words, to attack him or criticize him is an attack on science. Like, if that isn't the most despotic imperial edict I've heard in the modern society, that's absurd.
To say it is to refute it at the same time.
And I mean, here's the thing, is the people that would say, I'm pro-mask, pro-vax mandates, again, because we don't care if you got the vaccine or not. We've said this before, but I just want to reiterate here on this episode for any new listeners. We are not against the vaccine per se. If you want it, go ahead and get it. If it makes sense for you, that's fine. We're not casting aspersions on anybody who did or did not. What we have a problem with is somebody advocating for forcing their personal medical decision on other people for any reason whatsoever. That force, that is where the line is drawn. And so, when Fauci says, to go against me is to go against science, or you have the CDC, which is a bureaucracy of unelected bureaucrats, right? Nobody voted for anybody in the CDC, and they are setting housing policy, extending the eviction moratorium. What happened to these democracy sacred people who say, well, if you don't like them, you can vote them out? I don't remember voting for the director of the CDC. I don't remember seeing Fauci's name on a ballot. But yet these unelected bureaucrats that stay in government for decades are now setting wide sweeping policies that have nothing to do with their expertise. What does the CDC have any expertise on housing policy or economics? They have none, but they can just unilaterally extend the eviction moratorium. If that is your version of democracy, then you're bed buddies with Gentili and Mussolini. There's a reason why none of this bothers you, is because you don't understand what fascism is. When you see it, it seems to make sense to you. Because in your mind, you would agree with Mussolini. You are the state and the state is you. And if you want to force people to get vaccinated, it's okay if Fauci says that you should have to.
They're too dumb to know what's good for them, so we'll force them into what's good for them.
Right.
Which is, i.e.
fascism.
Thank you. And then that's the path to hell. The best way to sum this entire episode up is the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah, you were just trying to stop the spread of a virus. And you thought this was a movie. And you thought once the vaccine came out and everyone took it, magically this thing would disappear. Well, guess what? This isn't a movie. There's no credits that are going to roll. There's no cinematic, illustrious final scene. This is something that we are going to be dealing with for at least the next 20, if not the rest of our history. And you need to bunker down and treat it the same way that we treat most other diseases. Be safe, take care of yourself, get healthy, be responsible for your own health, which, again, the CDC and none of the people in none of your cathedral has ever said, start exercising, start eating better. That's never been said this entire time. But just start digesting information for yourselves, make a rational conclusion for what's best for your health as you see it, and move forward from there. That's all you can control is yourself. And don't impose your views on other people, because now that you're getting into that fascistic territory. That's it.
Indeed. So,
stop being a scared little bitch, by the way.
Listen, and if you are, good on you.
Stay inside.
You can always stay home.
Stay inside. If you're scared of the world, stay inside, Chicken Little. Stay.
So with that being said, where can you find this episode? You can find it at wmdpodcast.com/55. We encourage everybody to go there, because then you can jump on the email list and stay in contact with us there. But you can also jump on in the comment section of the show notes page and chop it up with us. But if you don't want to go there, you can also find this on any podcast app you have. Spotify, iTunes, Podcast Addict, Stitcher, you name it, you'll find us there. And then also just search us on Google or YouTube, Weapons of Meme Destruction. Find us on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as well. So with that being said, we hope next week is a little bit cheerier. We hope the cult doesn't take another 10 steps marching toward even more fascism than they already have. And we can bring a little cheer to your life next week.
And above all, stay safe, stay salty, and come back next week.